The Allen Line Company thanks all the hard-working drivers who are moving goods across the country. We can't do it without you.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
Respiratory illnesses have always been a problem, especially for truckers who can't simply go home and suffer through them like other people can do. In the past, the flu was the big problem every year, but in recent years, COVID has been added to the mix and the viral illness RSV has become a bigger problem. I'll get a primer from Dr. Tony Hudson of Interstate Health. One of the most basic principles of American justice is that we are innocent until proven guilty. But if your case is in civil court instead of criminal, that's not exactly how it works. Many of the interactions truckers have with enforcement personnel involve civil infractions, and it's a distinction that truckers should be aware of. I'll talk with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal. And finally, trucking interests in Oregon contend that state's weight distance tax is too high, violating the state's constitution. Now, lawmakers in the state are discussing how to fix that. Scott Thompson covers that, plus a failed effort in Washington state to update idling rules with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We'll begin with our weekly check on diesel prices. After a string of increases, they're on the decline again. The Energy Information Administration says a national average dipped more than 5 cents last week to $4.05 a gallon. That's the biggest drop so far this year after spiking some 35 cents in the two previous reporting periods. Every region saw prices go down, save for the Rocky Mountain region, where the average is up more than 4 cents to $3.99. The Gulf Coast recorded the biggest dip of 7.6 cents to a national low of $3.76 a gallon. ProMiles data paints a similar picture. The Tuesday morning average settled in at $4.05 a gallon, down 2 cents compared to the same day last week. It's deja vu all over again on the spot market, with load posts down once again. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
The number of weekly load posts on DAT dropped 8.6% last week. Robert Rouse says that brought the number to around 598,000, which is the first time they've seen a drop below 600,000 since the pandemic lockdowns of April of 2020.
The total number of load posts was down about 59% year over year. And the number of reefer load posts was the lowest for any full week, going all the way back to 2017. And so definitely we're really at the bottom, hopefully, of the market. But we're seeing kind of the lowest loads we've seen in a long, long time. When we look at the total number of trucks on the DAT load board, they also fell by about 3.3%, down to 323,000. That's 18% lower year over year than last year, and down about 20% compared to the same week in 2020. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load-to-truck ratios decrease again for all three equipment types. We're currently seeing load-to-truck ratios approaching all-time lows that were last seen during the pandemic in 2020.
Rouse says spot rates dropped across all three equipment types for the fourth straight week. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Another U.S. congressman has added their support to the House speed limiter bill, the second since OOIDA called for action last week. Representative Randy Feenstra of Iowa is the Drive Act's 36th co-sponsor. It comes amid a new push from the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Last week, the association sent a letter to every Republican member of the House, including Speaker Mike Johnson, imploring them to get anti-speed limiter legislation passed. Time is of the essence. FMCSA plans to publish a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking this coming May, at which time the agency is likely to reveal what it has in mind for a top speed. OOIDA has been pushing back against a mandate from the get-go, pointing out the safety implications that will arise due to increased interactions between commercial motor vehicles and passenger vehicles. To get involved in the fight, check out fightingfortruckers.com. The Teamsters are calling for action in Kentucky over an autonomous truck bill. House Bill 7 would basically strip the guardrails for driverless trucks in the Bluegrass state. No oversight, no safety driver requirements under 62,000 pounds. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters this week urging Kentucky state senators to vote no. A news release pointed to safety problems in states that already allow driverless vehicles. The Teamsters said driverless trucks are a danger to highway safety and to thousands of jobs in Kentucky. It's worth noting that a similar bill did make it to Governor Andy Beshear's desk last year, but he vetoed it. We finally know how much Berkshire Hathaway forked over for the remainder of Pilot Travel Center's shares. In its annual report, Berkshire said it paid $2.6 billion for the last 20% of the company. That door opened when the Haslam family, the founders of Pilot, decided to sell off its remaining shares earlier this year. All told, Berkshire paid a total of $13.6 billion for Pilot. New details tonight about the Michigan repair shop that recently admitted to installing defeat devices on hundreds of trucks. Diesel Freak has been ordered to pay a $750,000 fine for violating the Clean Air Act. The company's owner and 2 employees were also sentenced to 1 year of probation. An EPA investigation found that the company had deleted the emissions controls from more than 360 trucks over a roughly 3-year period. Diesel Freak's owner told prosecutors that most of his business came from installing defeat devices. The sentencing is just the latest development in this investigation. Last fall, 2 separate trucking companies in Michigan were fined $1 million each for their part in the scheme. Tragedy in Alabama overnight. A 47-year-old truck driver was killed when his truck caught fire early Tuesday morning. Authorities say the truck was parked behind a TA in Tuscaloosa at the time. Details are scarce right now. The driver has not been identified. Neither has a cause for the fire. An investigation is underway. A 3-day enforcement commercial motor vehicle blitz is underway in Kentucky. Kentucky State Police say the campaign, which falls under the Operation Safe Drive umbrella, will focus on unsafe driving behaviors that cause crashes involving heavy trucks. Scale houses will be used to check compliance while troopers patrol roadways for aggressive drivers, both in trucks and passenger vehicles. The 3-day blitz runs through Thursday. Meanwhile, transportation officials in Kentucky are reminding truckers hauling trash or debris to secure their loads. The notice comes after an increase in litter along state highways. The Kentucky Transportation Cabinet mentioned Interstate 69 in Marshall County as being a particularly bad spot. Crews recently removed a large amount of debris from about a 10-mile stretch there. Transportation officials believe a lot of it originated from trucks and trailers that weren't properly covered, as required by Kentucky state law. And finally, usually when smugglers try to cross into the U.S. with illegal drugs, they at least try to make it difficult for customs officials to find it, but not always. Take, for example, a bus last week at the Otay Mesa commercial facility in California, where a commercial truck was stopped for a secondary inspection. The truck was supposed to be hauling limes. Everything seemed to check out until a canine officer detected something. An inspection followed and turned up more than 150 boxes that were wrapped in photos of limes. But as you can probably guess, there weren't any limes inside. Instead, agents found cocaine, about $3 million worth. The truck driver was arrested, the trailer was seized, and an investigation is underway. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to William H. Newland of Winchester, Virginia. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 52 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 390 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella. Next, I'll discuss what you should know about respiratory illnesses with Dr. Tony Hudson of Interstate Health. We'll hear about civil infractions and penalties from David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, and Scott Thompson discusses an effort to fix Oregon's weight distance tax with state expert Keith Goebel. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now, 855-976-4291.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now, welcome back. Recently, you may have seen media reports about a so-called triple threat, 3 respiratory illnesses that were all going through the public at the same time. We wanted to get the facts behind that, so we called Dr. Tony Hudson at Interstate Health. So I'm wondering if we can start with some definition. By now, I think we all know what COVID is. That's pretty general knowledge, but there are new strains out there. What is the dominant strain of COVID right now? How serious is it? And what are the symptoms people should be looking for?
Well, of course, every new strain has a Latin or Greek, name mark. So it actually evolves, fairly quickly now. Quickly meaning in a matter of maybe a few weeks to a few months. I mean, it's not a sort of a slow, indolent process. Obviously, we've been involved with COVID for, quite a long time now, early 2020. The strains, by and large, have continued to mutate, but have also their virulence has continued to lessen over that period of time, which is expected. Any type of a virus like this, mutations tend to weaken the virus, and also there's a tremendous amount of immunity, both natural, and acquired, and also through immunization that's out there now in the general public. Our regulatory groups don't tend to focus too much on that. So I'll try to stay really non-political about it. Right. Okay. Everybody has an opinion about issues. So I'll try to stick to what, I do best, and that's hopefully practice good medicine.
Well, we've got the COVID strain out. There's something else we've got going on at the same time. There's a couple of other illnesses, and the one I want to talk about first is influenza. I think one of the things I always like to clear up is what is and is not actually flu. For example, I frequently hear people refer to stomach flu. So what actually is the flu? What are the symptoms for that? And how serious can flu get?
Well, influenza, actually, most people who, if they do indeed have influenza, in the current, state of the way infectious disease are getting sicker with influenza than they are with COVID-related illnesses. That's the difference in phenomena that we're seeing right now. A lot of people say, well, you hear this oftentimes. They'll come in and say, well, I had the flu 2 days ago and I'm okay now. Well, they didn't have the flu 2 days ago. Influenza, is an illness that typically will cause you to feel symptomatic for a good, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, sometimes longer than that. So much of that has to do with the underlying conditions that an individual may have. Someone who's very healthy, maybe young, middle-aged, versus someone who has some age. And, I don't like to characterize, there's no cutoff mark. People put all time, well, let's say if you're over 50 this, if you're over 65 that, but generally speaking, people in their 50s, 60s or older, if they have what I would call comorbidities, they just tend to take longer to get over an illness, and they tend to, get sicker. And that's true both in the non-commercial driving population, but certainly it's true in the commercial driving population. But most people with influenza, they do get some degree of fever in terms of temperature in the range, 100, 101, 102, not 103, 104. When you see that type of febrile response in an older person, i.e. over 65 or so, that usually relates to some other kind of systemic illness, coming from their genitourinary tract. I bring that up because that's a common problem also for our commercial drivers. And so what I call low-grade fever, they feel bad, they lethargic, they don't feel like getting up out of bed. Their bones and body, as they say, ache, a lot of muscle aches, headache, if you get illness that descends, say, into the lower respiratory tract, you can have some respiratory distress. But most of the time, the symptoms are upper airway, sore throat.
Well, I know body aches is something that comes with that sometimes.
The body aches are probably very typical. You see that, you rarely see that in somebody that has a quote cold. If they've got a cold, they've got a cold. And it's usually that's upper airway, nasal, and actually there's more overlap right now, Mark, with what we see with COVID symptoms and cold symptoms than any overlap with actual flu symptoms and COVID symptoms. Now, it's not always there again, you're depending upon the age group. Some young people might present, and it's very challenging, to differentiate, well, does someone have influenza? Do they have, COVID, or do they have just a really bad, rhinovirus, like a cold virus? So there is overlap. But I think one of the key things I've seen over my decades is when somebody comes in and they just look sick and they're telling you they ache all over, they have a temperature in the range of 100, 101, 102, sort of a bone chilling feel to them, then more likely than not, they really do have classic influenza.
I think the third of these illnesses that's kind of going around right now, and I think probably fewer people are aware of this one, is RSV. Can you explain what that is and how it differs from these other two respiratory illnesses?
Well, again, you get a lot of overlap. We never talked about RSV much, a few years ago, except in the pediatric population and actually younger infants. Most everyone, by the time they reach 9-year age, have had significant exposures. That's a respiratory syncytial virus, but it's been around for forever. It's not something new, but at least over the last couple of years, there has been more illness in an older population. I don't really think anybody can explain that entirely. Then there was a movement, in the vaccine industry to come up with a vaccine, that for RSV. I've not seen a significant uptake of that vaccine. People have it's hard enough to get and I'm just speaking very candid with you, it's hard enough to get people to take their flu vaccine. And so, which in my opinion is really the most, if I had to say, okay, choose one, I would tell people now, get the flu vaccine. So again, it's very difficult, to differentiate just with symptoms alone. Well, do you have RSV? Do you have COVID? Do you have, influenza? We'll get into a minute why there is some relevance in terms of what you're trying to do, to make that differentiation. And we do have some good testing, a lot better than it was a couple of years ago, for rapid testing for especially influenza and COVID, not for RSV.
Okay. Now, I've read some reports in the media that have talked about all three of these being out right now, and some are labeling it a triple threat. That's the term they used. So rather than just go with that, I'm wondering if you can kind of spell out for us, with your experience in the driver community especially, how bad is the current situation regarding these three illnesses compared with, say, a typical flu season?
Well, I mean, there's definitely been an uptick over the last, several weeks, but right now, across the country, and I keep up with that data epidemiologically, it looks to me like everything's leveling out. And we certainly aren't seeing a lot of people, primarily, we're talking about the commercial driving world. We're not seeing a lot of commercial drivers that are, being struck mightily in terms of, a lot of lost time events or anything like that. So they're out there. They're going to be out there forever. We're not really going to change that trajectory. It gets all the way back to trying to teach people some basic tenets of good health. That if you look at the bottom line, what's going to help people more than anything else, if you're generally healthy and you get any of these, you're going to come out okay. If you're generally not healthy and you get any of these, then you're probably going to have some challenges. And so that's why we try to preach and encourage our commercial drivers to keep up with their basic immunizations. And again, from my vantage point right now, the most important thing they need to do is get their influenza vaccine annually. I mean, it's got a long track record. We know it works a lot better than it did, several decades ago.
Now, looking past vaccinations, which is kind of an obvious one, and looking at these three illnesses, what other things can people do to prevent themselves from getting it? You mentioned good health, but there's always the thing they tell us of washing your hands. With COVID, there was the masking that they told us to do. What is your best course of action to try and avoid these, to prevent them?
Again, if you had to take one thing that people could do, would be get yourself in good health. In other words, do everything that you can do. And there's been some good studies now looking retrospectively at who came out better, during COVID. And of course, common sense would have told you, if you'd have been doing what I've done for the last 50 years, the individuals that were in reasonably good health had less problems with COVID. People that had a lot of chronic illness didn't do as well. And so that's been and that's true for anything. I mean, if you get in a car wreck and you're chronically ill, you're probably not going to come out as well as somebody who's generally in good health. Sometimes it's hard. Those things sound so simplistic, Mark, but they really, really do work. I mean, we could talk about pills and potions but just day in, day out, if people take care of themselves and whatever comes up in terms of their overall health, they respond to it better. There are some supplements that probably do enhance, and I'm not a big guy about promoting pills, okay, but there's some compounds, and this is soft, but it's harmless. You always want to look at anything that you're advising to someone. Well, what's the upside? Okay, then what's the downside? If you're able to help someone without potentially causing them harm, then you can recommend that type of an intervention, with less concern, less anxiety. Zinc, vitamin C. There's a compound called quercetin, Quercetin, you can get over the counter, which again they do seem to help sort of boost your immune system. But again, there's no magic bullet. At least I've used and advised people. There's a compound called Covixyl, Covixyl. It's an over-the-counter nasal spray, and it does seem to create a little bit of a barrier to inhibit viral, reproduction in the nasal passage. So those are things that people can obtain. You don't need a prescription. They don't cost a lot of money, but they will not. If you decide you want to stay unhealthy, and you're just going to take some vitamins and minerals and thinking that that's going to keep you in a preventive mode, that's not going to work too well.
That was Dr. Tony Hudson of Interstate Health, which operates clinics at several truck stops and other locations, talking about 3 respiratory illnesses that are making the rounds right now. You can learn more about Interstate Health and the services they offer at their website, interstatehealth.com. Again, that's interstatehealth.com. We'll have that link, plus all the other phone numbers, website links, and email addresses we mention here on the show on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the headline at the top of the page. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. And if you have questions about medical certification or related regulations, you can call OOIDA's Business Services Department at 816-229-5791. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the program. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
One of the most basic principles of American justice is that we are innocent until proven guilty, and we all deserve our day in court. But in fact, sometimes that's not the case. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. In criminal court, the innocent until proven guilty principle still holds true, but civil court is an entirely different animal altogether. Many of the interactions truckers have with enforcement personnel involve civil infractions rather than criminal, and it's a distinction truckers should be aware of. To get the facts, I talked with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal. Our topic here is civil penalty citations, and I guess we ought to start off with, for folks that aren't familiar, what is a civil penalty citation?
Sure, Mark. It's really pretty simple. A civil penalty is something that's set by the state and usually by an administrative board for an inspection. So you get an inspection, say North Carolina, we see them a lot there. You get an inspection and you have an out of service perhaps, or you have a bad one of the big killer inspections going over a railroad track, any number of things, or overweights, and they set the public policy board sets a fine. So you've already been, so remember, on an inspection, unlike a ticket, you're already found guilty the minute the inspection is entered. Once that violation is entered on there, it goes on the carrier's record, it goes on the driver's record, and then they can come back without a court and they can fine you. I see them as low as $30 fines to as high as up to $10,000. And so, of course, that's either okay, we'll go ahead and pay it because it's not changing anything about what happened on the inspection. It's just more like, I tell people, it's more like a tax. But you do have opportunities to kind of dispute these things.
Just as kind of an aside here, you mentioned that you're guilty the minute the inspection is entered. And I can imagine there's some folks out there thinking, hey, wait a minute, aren't I innocent until proven guilty? Just in layman's terms, can you explain how this system allows that to happen, why it is that that's the case?
Right. So just to explain the difference, in a court, you have a prosecutor, you have an attorney that's fighting on your side, and you have an impartial judge, supposedly. And that's the system. You're innocent until you're proven guilty. In this particular case, one person, the DOT officer, who is, by the way, trained thousands of hours on these inspections. And when they write that inspection, and I love it, they'll tell drivers, oh, this is just a warning. Well, yes, everything on an inspection is a warning because there's no court. And because there's no court, your appeal process is to do a data queue challenge, to send it back through the officer, through the FMCSA that actually, or the officer's boss, who actually wrote the citation. And so there is no impartial judge. You have to make proof. You have to show proof that they have erred in the writing of this violation.
But it's a case where civil court is different than criminal court, right? I mean, fundamentally, innocent until proven guilty only applies in the criminal side of the system.
Right. And it's not even a court. It's an administrative board that oversees when you try to fight these. It's not a judge. It's a group of 3 to 7 people, and they'll tell you right on the paperwork that they're not plea bargaining with you. They're not looking at any gray areas or reasonable doubt. What they're looking for is either proof or no proof of the innocence. So it's a very high standard for the driver.
I wonder if you can offer us some typical examples of these civil penalties. What are some of the most common ones?
The most common ones are for out-of-service violations. You get 2 or 3 out-of-service violations, and they charge you, and those are fairly small. You also find, I see them in Ohio and Oklahoma and Florida a lot for overweight violations. Well, if you don't write them a ticket, you can't make any money off the overweight violation. But because of these civil penalties and this is not from always the public safety department, it's usually the finance department that sends these out and then hires this board. So that's just a way for them to make money. It really is just a tax. But sometimes they go overboard out. If you have in Ohio an overweight or 2 overweights, and you've had a civil penalty on one of them already, the fines go up. I mean, just like anything else, 3 strikes and you're out, that kind of thing. So you've got to be really careful once you get one, because one might be a $500 fine, and the second one might be, like I said, a $10,000 fine. And that's hard to stomach.
If they give you a ticket in addition to the inspection, does that increase your chances of being able to dispute it?
Yes. I can't think of ever seeing a ticket with an inspection where there was a civil penalty. Now, that's just anecdotal. I'm not stating that as a fact. And yes, if you have a ticket, then of course, if it's reduced or dismissed in court, then we have the ability to go back with a data queue challenge and fight that. And it's generally automatic.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can go over a little bit, and you've kind of referred to this earlier, but the civil penalties show up on your record. Where do they show up, and how does that affect you?
Alex, I can answer this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So really where the civil penalty will show up on your record is, in fact, where the inspection is showing up on your record. So the civil penalty is just a fine that's tacked onto the violation on the inspection. And so wherever that inspection is showing up, if you're an owner-op, you've got your CSA score and your PSP. And if you're just driving under someone else's DOT number, then you've got your PSP. So it'll show up in those places. Now, that is from the inspection. If you had gotten an inspection without a civil penalty, it would show up just the same. Now, the civil penalty is only going to be that fine tacked on. And the only real penalty for not paying the fine is not more violations or extra violations. It's probably just they'll chase you down and increase your fine. Potentially, I don't even know, Alex, but would they put a warrant out or something like that? Maybe reach out to the DOT and have them shut down in extremely rare cases when it gets that far. But I'm not saying that civil penalties are toothless, but they are probably, aside from warning tickets, the least consequential version of a penalty that a driver would get at a roadside stop.
But at the same time, I would think, you mentioned the CSA score. A lot of shippers and receivers look at that, and that plays a role in their decision whether or not they'll use a particular carrier. Can it have a pretty significant effect that way?
Yes. So again, with the civil penalty being added onto the inspection violation, it's not really changing anything about that violation. But yes, if you're receiving these violations on your inspection, it's going up on a record and that record is being viewed, then that will affect your ability in the marketplace to outbid your competition.
I want to talk a little bit about the appeal process. And Alex, you had mentioned earlier kind of the data queue typically goes back to the agency that issued the inspection report or the citation in the first place. Is that universal? Are there different states have different ways of handling these appeals?
As far as I know, that's universal. They have someone in every state who's responsible for when the data queues come in to look them over and then re-engage with us, letting us know whether we've won or we've not won. And usually we try very hard to put in cases that have a reasonable possibility to win. I know there's people that just say, oh, just data queue everything. But if you data queue everything, kind of like being the whatever that cried wolf, and 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, they begin. I know, just human nature. They look at those and go, okay, another one of these things. He's got no proof. We actively recruit for proof from the drivers or the carrier as to, before we do a challenge. And because the last thing you want is to get a reputation for making frivolous challenges. And it's not going to hurt me. It's going to hurt the carrier.
I'm curious, you've mentioned evidence a couple of times. What kind of evidence would you be able to provide to dispute some of these? I mean, give us a few examples.
Okay. Well, first of all, I got an example from today. So that I was looking at. The driver has a GPS that captures pictures along the roadside of certain significant things. One of them was a speed limit. He got stopped a half a mile past the sign that said 70 and was written up for 66 and a 55. And so we're making that challenge today as it goes. I mean, that's proof. Now, do I perfectly well know where exactly that sign was? No, but they do. The DOT knows. And they know that, if he got past there, they've made a mistake. We have violations sometimes that are written up for out of service orders. And, I have a nice little book from CVSA that tells me all of the out of service violations. And you go through there and you got to go, it's lawyers that, printed this up. So you got to be really careful, but often we'll get not the violation itself taken off, but we'll get the out of service, which is just about as important. Because the more out of services you have, the worse it is. But it's things like that. And there's probably a lot more examples, but those are 2 that just come to mind right now.
Okay. Guys, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
I've been talking with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, a legal services provider for the trucking industry, about civil penalty citations. You can learn more about this topic by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836 or go to the website, cdllegal.com. And you can find all that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box. That's where we put all the websites, email addresses, and phone numbers that we mention here on the show. Again, that's at our website, landlinenow.com. A few notices we wanted to remind you about. Registration is now open for OOIDA's Truck to Success seminar, which runs for 3 days starting October 22nd in Blue Springs, Missouri. The deadline to register to attend in person is October 1st, while the deadline to register to attend by Zoom is October 21st. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration plans to renew an exemption for auto haulers that has allowed them to drive Stinger-steered transporter equipment without warning flags on overhanging loads. The agency will take comments through March 22nd. If approved, the 5-year extension would run into 2029. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you truck on a CAT scale.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline now, welcome back. Time to wrap things up on today's show by doing our weekly check on state houses throughout the nation. We'll spend some time in the Pacific Northwest today looking at two separate issues in two separate states. And the man to help us make sense of all of it, as always, Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Keith, how are you?
High expectations, Scott. I appreciate that.
The highest of expectations. You better not fail. You better not let us down, Keith. So a spirited discussion taking place in Oregon where I guess a recent report found that truckers in the state were being overcharged on their taxes. We'll get into what some state lawmakers are now trying to do about that, but let's start with the problem itself. How bad is it?
Well, it is not getting better. In Oregon, it is a topic. The taxes that truckers are paying there, they are supposed to be proportionate, or it's supposed to be the same, essentially, that you're paying out if you drive a large vehicle as compared to a smaller vehicle, and that has continued to get further and further out of whack. And that is why it's being forced on the state legislature. They're having to address it. The trucking industry's paid, according to figures that are provided by the Oregon Trucking Association, more than a third more of all taxes that are paid by Oregon motorists. And the legislature has not acted on that, even though the state's constitution says that if there is a disparity, that's unconstitutional. You've got to take action. They have not taken action, you've got the Oregon Trucking Association that has also filed a lawsuit against the state, the Oregon DOT, the governor, the heads of both the House and the Senate, really forcing the issue because the legislature has not wanted to act on this, which making a change to the state's constitution requires that the state legislature approve it and that the governor then sign to make a change. And we'll see. We'll see if we're headed in that direction now. But it has definitely been a process that Oregon Trucking Association definitely has taken the lead there, and pointing out the problem with it and how it's not getting better. During COVID, there was belief there in the state that this was all going to even out in a couple of years after the fact, and it has not. So they're to the point. It's like, okay, this is not going to self-correct. This is just getting more and more out of balance as compared to where it's supposed to be. So trying to address that now.
Yeah, it's one thing, I suppose, if you've paid extra taxes one year. I just keep thinking of the people who've been doing this for several years and how much money they have poured into, through taxes there. We talked about the effort briefly there about what is happening with a lawsuit. I know there are several bills, I think a few actually, that would address this issue. Are refunds part of the discussion there? Obviously correcting this moving forward, but going back to and issuing refunds, is that being discussed at all?
Yeah, that's one of the options. There are three bills. There are two Senate bills. There is one House bill. They're all, headed in the same direction. The Joint Committee on Transportation, they held their first hearing where they discussed these three bills. The House version maybe it's the most extensive of the versions, but it would require the state's DOT to prepare and submit a report on what needs to be changed so that they can balance the cost between cars and trucks. There were some changes that were proposed during the meeting to add to that House version, which would return the weight mile taxes to the rates that were imposed back in 2020. There is another amendment that was proposed that would repeal the weight mile tax. And there is another amendment that would, instead of weight mile tax, implement collection of fuel taxes on those commercial vehicles. And then there are the two Senate bills. They're very similar. One of those would lower the weight mile taxes. The other would issue refunds to taxpayers who have overpaid for their weight mile taxes here in recent years. So, for the most part, these bills are just they're going about making the same types of corrections, all in differing ways, but in effect trying to provide the same benefit, which is no longer having truckers pay a disproportionate amount than they have been, and that it's getting worse.
Yeah. If you are listening to this from Oregon, we'd, of course, encourage you to reach out to your representative there to let them know that this bill is out there, or these bills are out there, I suppose, and could do a lot of good for you in terms of getting some of that money back and not making the problem worse here moving forward. Let's move on to Washington State here up the road a little bit. A state we've lauded in recent months and years for their efforts to help truck drivers. There is a bill now that would have done the opposite, was gaining some traction. This is a bill about truck idling rules, but looks like it's dead for now, at least, Keith.
Yeah, we've talked a lot glowingly about actions that have been pursued and approved in Washington State here in recent years. I mean, there was bound to be something that was going to come up that was going to be an alert in the opposite direction. In the end, yet again, though, it's a positive not action in Washington State, but inaction by essentially letting this pursuit of an idling restriction there at the State House that would the legislation looked to California, what California has done in regulation there, and then bringing that to Washington State, specifically their 5-minute idling limit that they have for vehicles in excess of 10,000 pounds. And for those affected vehicles, if they were found to be in violation of the idling rule that they were pursuing, like it is in California, you face the possibility of $1,000 a day fine if you're idling your vehicle in excess of that amount of time. So yeah, that was something that was brought up. Worth pointing out, it was brought up by the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. So I mean, it had one of the leading lawmakers there in the Senate behind this. But in the end, enough concern about it by those on the committee and from those who provided testimony that they didn't just want to just go in and just accept what California regulation has in their rules, and instead communicating that we're different than California here, and we should be implementing our own rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I know you're looking into right now. I think Illinois, is that right, is considering something or has been considering this as well. So we've seen this in California. Things happen in California and other states kind of catch on and try to follow that lead. But as we know, each state is different and needs to follow these rules and regulations differently as well. I do want to say in Washington State, this is dead for now, it looks like, but you do point out in your piece on landline.media that maybe not dead forever.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there was a lot of opposition to this, but this particular bill that is dead, they haven't voted on it, but the word out is that it's dead. It had multiple provisions in it. One of the provisions not related to idling, it was related to tire options for passenger vehicles. That issue in and itself got a lot of pushback. And in effect, that is the reason why that this bill is dead. Multiple provisions in it, one of which was idling. They had a lot of opposition. But the idling rule itself, that pursuit, wasn't the reason why the bill is dead. So it's possible that it could be brought back up later in the year. The Trucking Association there in Washington State, their belief is that it is done for the year, but something that most likely will be revisited as early as next year.
If that happens, you'll keep us updated. Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Check out his work at landline.media and in every issue of the magazine itself. Keith, thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
And that's our show for today. As always, we appreciate you tuning in and hope you will again soon. Until then, take care and drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.